This is the second of two space race slides, and slide 12 overall, our last slide for our 60s unit. This one will be a little longer than the last one, not much. But let's finish up the space race here. As we said, throughout most of, or all the 50s and most of the 60s, we're chasing the Soviets. And that will be the same in July of 1965, when Ed White becomes the first American to walk in space, which simply means, as you see in the picture here, that he got out of his space capsule and floated around. This was in Earth orbit, so while orbiting Earth, White gets out of his spaceship and floats around. Now, he is attached to it by a long cable. He doesn't have a little jetpack or anything like that yet. So he'll float out and then pull himself back in. But again, we're chasing the Soviets. They had already had a cosmonaut get out of their spaceship and float around, so now it's the Americans' turn. And Ed White will accomplish that. So we're continuing to move along here, but we're now halfway through the decade, and we still haven't left Earth orbit with a human. So we got a lot to do. And all of that is going to come to a grinding halt in January of 1967, when Apollo 1 catches fire on the launch pad during a test launch. 3 astronauts, Ed White, yes, this same Ed White as is in the picture here, Ed White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee will all die on board Apollo 1 on the launch pad during a test launch. This is a test under actual launch conditions, so they're all in their space suits and helmets and all of that. The capsule has been pumped full of pure oxygen, because they will need that to breathe. It is sealed shut, and a spark ignites under one of the seats. And in a small compartment filled with pure oxygen, fire quickly spreads, very quickly. You see here at the bottom of the page a picture of the inside of the capsule after the fire has been extinguished. The astronauts actually don't burn to death. They die of asphyxiation. Fire needs oxygen to burn, so the capsule is quickly, the oxygen is consumed by the fire and filled with poisonous fumes. So they will die of asphyxiation before they are burned to death. But one thing we do learn out of this is that the capsule has been very poorly designed, so as not to have some sort of accident in space. There's no way to release the door from the inside. The only way to open the capsule is from the outside, and that's with a special wrench. And by the time they get the door open, the astronauts are already dead. So the whole capsule will be redesigned, a new door will be installed. So we do learn a lot from this, but at the expense of 3 lives. So this is January 67. So we're now 3 years from needing to put a man on the moon. We still haven't left Earth orbit with men, and all of a sudden NASA is going to grind to a halt while it investigates exactly what happened with Apollo 1. So while the Soviets are moving forward, we have come to a complete standstill thanks to the Apollo 1 disaster. Eventually, things get going again. Apollo 8 in December 1968 will be the first manned mission to get to the moon. They won't land on the moon, but they will orbit the moon. Down here at the bottom, you see the Apollo 8 patch. Here's the Apollo 1 patch and Apollo 8. Every mission had its own little special patch designed. And Apollo 8 was set to orbit the moon. So here you see the Earth and the moon, and a nice little, works out nicely, figure 8, orbiting both the Earth and the moon. So Apollo 8 makes a figure 8. Their job is to scout landing spots for the Apollo 11, which will eventually get to the moon. So they will orbit the moon looking for landing, the best places to land. And they will take this very famous photo. The guy taking it is the commander of the mission, a man named Jim Lovell. If you're familiar with the movie Apollo 13, Tom Hanks character in Apollo 13 is Jim Lovell. This is the same guy. And Lovell will take this very famous photograph here. It's called Earthrise. Here on Earth, we have sunrise and moonrise and sunset and moonset and all that. But from the moon doesn't rise. From the moon, the Earth rises. This picture you're seeing here. This is taken as they come around the backside of the moon and see the Earth for the first time from the moon. This picture is the first time the Earth had been seen from the moon. And as you come over the horizon of the moon right here, the Earth comes into view. So it's known as Earthrise. Very famous photo. Okay. And eventually, the United States will win the space race. We are the only nation to go to the moon, first and the only one, with Apollo 11. In July 1969, Kennedy's promise is fulfilled, long after his death. But we fulfill his promise to get to the moon, return a man safely to Earth by the end of the decade. July of 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Edwin is his name, Edwin Aldrin, but he goes by Buzz. So Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins will go to the moon. Here you see the famous photo of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, the Apollo 11 patch. The Eagle was the name of the landing module. The Eagle has landed, very famous radio broadcast there. The Earth in the background, half red, half blue, communism and democracy, splitting the Earth. But Neil Armstrong will take those famous historic first steps on the moon and deliver his famous quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Armstrong will become famous as the first man on the moon, and very few of you, I doubt, knew the second man to walk on the moon. And there was some great debate about that. Neil Armstrong was the mission commander. Right? Buzz Aldrin was the pilot. And there was some debate before they ever took off as to who would be the first to walk on the moon. Armstrong says, "I'm the commander of this mission, it'll be me." Aldrin says, "I'm the pilot landing us on the moon, it'll be me." What it comes down to, you'll never guess, so I'll just go on and tell you. Not that you could guess anyway here, it's a video of notes. But what it comes down to is that Armstrong is sitting by the door. The way the capsule had been designed, the mission commander was seated next to the door, the pilot was seated on the opposite side of the capsule. So for Aldrin, in his full spacesuit and pack and helmet and all of that, to be the first man out, he would have had to climb over Neil Armstrong to get to the door, and there simply wasn't room in the capsule. So who the first man out is simply comes down to Armstrong is sitting by the door, oddly enough. Aldrin always felt very cheated here, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for Aldrin, because the guy who's really cheated here is Michael Collins. And those of you that knew Buzz Aldrin's name, very few of you I would be willing to bet, I bet none of you even knew the name Michael Collins. While Armstrong and Aldrin are walking around on the moon, Collins is orbiting the moon. Armstrong and Aldrin are on the moon for a couple of days, doing experiments, walking around, collecting specimens, all this and that. While all that's going on, Michael Collins is orbiting the moon. The craft that landed on the moon won't come back to Earth. It's simply meant to get them back out into the moon's orbit and redock with the capsule that will take them back to Earth. And in that capsule is Michael Collins. So for several days, he flies around and around and around the moon all by himself. He could literally fly over them, look out his little window, and see them down on the surface of the moon, but he never got to land and get out. So he flies all the way to the moon, flies around the moon, never gets to land and get out. He's the guy who really gets screwed here. So, that's the end of our 60s unit. It was a very difficult, very tumultuous decade. Civil rights, protests, Vietnam War violence, war protests, 1968, lots of assassinations. It is a difficult, depressing decade. In fact, really the only good thing to come out of that decade positive, especially the only good thing to come out of 1968 positive, was the fact that I, Mr. Rapp, your favorite U.S. history teacher, was born in that tumultuous decade of 1968.